What's up, everyone? I know this is not my typical intro, but this is also not a typical episode for me. In fact, it's not really an official episode at all. You may or may not have seen on Twitter last week, but this past Friday was my last day as a full-time employee at numberFire and FanDuel. I stepped away because it was time. It had nothing to do with FanDuel, which is an incredible place to work. It had nothing to do with the people I was working with. Sometimes with your job, you just know when you need to do something else. I was the editor-in-chief of numberFire for 8.5 years. numberFire was purchased by FanDuel, and I spent about 5 or so years as FanDuel's editor-in-chief. It's been a while since I had this kind of change. When I started analyzing fantasy football, I had no idea what would happen. I never thought that I'd be able to get a full-time job doing the thing that I love doing. And I never even dreamed of having a podcast like this one. One where I can talk through the nerdy things that I love to talk through. And one where I can connect with people literally all over the world. But I'm at a point in my career, and honestly my life, where I want to do the one thing that I've always wanted to do. And that's launch my own business, be my own boss, talk about fantasy football the exact way that I want to talk about fantasy football. So for the first time, I want to introduce you guys to late round fantasy football. What I'm planning to do is not very complicated. You can head over to lateround.com right now and see for yourself. This podcast is going to largely be the same that it's always been. You'll get studies during the off season, you'll get the mailbag episodes, you'll get the goods. What's different is the other stuff that I'm planning to produce. So let's run through all of that. The first thing is the late round prospect guide. On March 14th, I'm launching a downloadable PDF that outlines my prospect model in detail. It talks through the model, it explains what to expect from a player's percentile ranking. The guide will provide rookie rankings, prospect profiles, statistical player comparables for every relevant wide receiver and running back in the class. It's going to be fun. It also will include discussion around my new year 2 model. Not just what it is, but where players rank and what it means for their future. You can currently pre-order that guide on lateround.com for $11.99. And then it's going to be $14.99 on March 14th when it officially launches. And the cool thing about it is that I'm going to refresh it after the draft. You'll get updated rankings and percentile scores. So if you purchase it, you'll automatically get an email to download the revised copy when that launches after the draft. And then at some point in June, I'm going to be launching the late round draft guide. This is a season-long guide that will focus not just on the upcoming season rankings and profiles like you get in a lot of other guides, but also strategy. You guys know that's my bread and butter. There's going to be more strategy talk jam-packed in that thing than any other guide in the market. That one's going to be a little bit more expensive because it's more comprehensive, but you'll also get updates throughout the summer emailed to your inbox. So 2 guides. There's also a Patreon. One piece of feedback that I received plenty of times through the years is that I don't do enough with rankings and tiers. I talk about them, I have them, but I don't make them very accessible. Well, the Patreon page is going to help with that. For $5 a month on the Patreon, you get weekly in-season data dumps, where I literally give you a spreadsheet with a lot of the same data that I look at on a weekly basis. So things like deep ball numbers, schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, neutral script pass rates. It's all listed on the Patreon page. Along with that, in this $5 tier, you get season-long rankings and tiers, dynasty rankings and tiers, and then priority to late round podcast mailbag episodes. Your questions get priority over questions from non-patrons. Now, if you want more than that, I've got more for you. If you spend $10 a month, you get all of those things that I just talked about, but in season, you get rest of season rankings and weekly rankings. So the $5 tier won't get you rankings in season. And then along with that, $10 patrons will have access to live streams with me throughout the season and the off season. So for example, I'll hop into the live stream during the season to talk waiver wire ads, and then I'll do my weekly start sit show on that live stream. I really want the late round fantasy football Patreon to be an awesome community for all of us. I'm not planning on just throwing rankings at you guys and walking away. I want discussion. I want to talk through things together so that we all get better. I'm really excited to get all that started. So we've got 2 guides. We've got the Patreon. And you might be wondering now, JJ, what about your written content? Very good question. Instead of putting that content in a blog or somewhere random on the internet, I'm starting a newsletter. You can sign up for that newsletter by going to lateround.com. That's lateround.com. Just input your name and email address, and anytime there's an article, it's going to hit your inbox. It honestly won't be all that often because I do so much podcasting. But things like the 15 transactions article, that's going to be in your inbox now. And then lastly, I know that I left FanDuel as a full-time employee, but I've still got some good news on that front. FanDuel is still going to be part of this podcast as the official sponsor of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. That's it. It's really that simple. It's the Late Round Prospect Guide, the Late Round Draft Guide, the Patreon, a newsletter, and this podcast. That's how I plan on feeding you as much fantasy football information as humanly possible. And honestly, guys, I cannot wait. I really think this is going to be so much fun for everyone. So again, head to lateround.com and get all of this information. Sign up for whatever you want to sign up for. And let's win some fantasy football championships together. And by the way, as you can probably imagine, things are a little bit crazy for me right now. There won't be any late round fantasy football podcast this week. And by the way, I'm adding fantasy football to the name of the show. I don't think I mentioned that. But there won't be any shows this week as I keep moving towards that prospect guide launch date. I'll be back next week, though, with an episode on players I'm looking to buy in Dynasty. Thanks, everyone. Your support means the world, and I'm pumped to get this thing going.